I give a hearty welcome to Mr. David Davidar to this session. Uh, this is his first visit to Odisha. Welcome to Odisha. And it looks like for the organizers of this festival that the mountain has moved to Muhammad. Okay. And anyway, welcome here and hope you are enjoying your stay here. And whatever is the residue of your stay, please enjoy it more. Mr. David Davidar has his hand in the publication of nearly 3,000 books. It is almost magical. So that means every 4th day of your publishing life, one book is coming out. And the average reading in this room, if it crosses 3,000, it will be equally amazing. But it will not be. But it's a great achievement. And as Manu said, that he really stewarded the publication industry and taken it to a different plane. This conversation, as you know, is going to be about the state of fiction in India, creative writing and publishing in the 21st century. So the first giveaway in the conversation is the first question, opening question is going to be, what is the state of fiction in India? Each one of us have their own take, but we are like the 6 blind men of Hindustan. We know only part of it. Let's hear from the horse's mouth, what is the state of fiction in India?
I think it's probably no one is qualified to describe the state of fiction in the country as a whole, because it's created in many, many languages. 18 major languages, hundreds of other languages in which books are published or fiction is written. The only language I'm properly qualified to comment on is English. And I'd say the state of fiction is, I think fiction is thriving. The quality, as always, is there are some greats and there are some not so great. I think, as with every country in the world, there are too many books published. And that hasn't changed in the 30-odd years that I've been publishing. So there's more of the same, but at the same time, obviously there's a generational shift. I mean, there are people who belong to the millennial generation, Generation Z, people under the age of 40, people under the age of 25. Their fiction has changed somewhat, especially with the advent of social media and so on, but the concerns remain the same, their preoccupations remain the same. I think there are things to be happy about and there are things to be concerned about, and that has never changed in all the time I've been publishing.
Okay. Truly, the diversity is daunting, and it is difficult to really pan out a picture in 3 minutes. And in your publication, in a journey in the publishing, you must have faced several challenges. That's a truism, actually. But can you, for the benefit of the viewers, tell us one of the biggest challenges you faced?
Well, about 25, 30 years ago, the publishing industry in this area, I'm not talking about textbooks or educational publishing, in English was practically non-existent. It was surprising because English had been around for a long time. It was the language of aspiration. And while it thrived in languages like Bengali and Malayalam and so on, in English it was non-existent. And I think the biggest challenge was trying to impose standards, trying to sort of create a marketplace, and trying to sort of make sure that promising writers got the services they required. Because before certain quality publishers set up shop in this country, people had to go outside. They had to go to England, they had to go to America to get published. All that's changed. Also, readers did not have the kind of writing from their own writers that writers in other rather more developed sort of publishing environments had. You go to America, you go to Britain, you go to France, Italy, etc. The writers that dominate those ecosystems are their own writers. less than 1% of writers actually travel around the world. That is a proven fact. Largely, writers thrive in their own countries. And in India, we didn't have that environment. And that was the biggest challenge to overcome, and that has been satisfactorily overcome. I think today, talented writers can get published in this country, can get read by readers in this country. So it is always unimaginable what existed 30 years ago and what exists today. Now I think the problems that we grapple with are problems that writers and readers and publishers grapple with everywhere. Declining reading habits, not enough bookstores, the quality being indifferent, as in the gatekeepers are not sufficiently equipped to keep out the not so good writers and encourage the good writers and so on. These are standard to other parts of the world. So I think we've come quite a long way.
35 years journey is a long journey, and you must have met hundreds of authors. I know, I'm asking you a politically incorrect question. Please answer it if you're comfortable. Please avoid it if it creates problem. Can you tell us about 3 best writers you have come across?
That is a question I can't answer. I just think I've published hundreds of writers. I must have had a reason to publish them all. So I honor and cherish all of them, but I would not single out any one writer because I just think it's something that I'm not comfortable with.
I guess that, because it is as bad as telling a father to choose his best son. Is not.
Well, there are lots of sort of defective sons and daughters, but I'm not going to sort of talk about them.
But even the defective son in the eyes of a father is not that defective.
Yeah, but that is for me to know, and that's the secret that I will keep.
Okay, right. I perfectly appreciate your sensitivity about the matter. In 1986, I think in Penguin, India, you brought out about 6 volumes, and R.K. Lakshman was one of them. And did Bikram Seth come at that time? Did he? Bikram Seth's volume? No, I don't think. That's later. But tell us about your first meeting with Mr. Lakshman or Mr. Bikram Seth.
Well, I think I published Lakshman, but I also published his more famous brother, R.K. Narayan. R.K. Narayan.
R.K. Narayan.
Yes.
R.K. Narayan, I meant.
Well, R.K. Narayan was, for many years, the perennial Indian hope for the Nobel Prize. And in its wisdom, the Nobel Prize Committee did not give it to him. He's one of the greatest writers we've published. One of the greatest writers that have emerged out of this country and this literary milieu, especially in English. And he was somebody I greatly admired, and he belonged to a different generation. Obviously, he belonged to the pre-independence generation. And when a bunch of us sort of set up Penguin in this country, he was one of the first people I went to for advice. And he said to me, you'd better shut shop and leave because there's nothing to be done in this country. We don't have enough writers, we do not have enough readers, we do not have enough bookshops. It's not worth doing. He was gracious enough to accept once Penguin established itself, and we, after we'd been in the country for a while, he gave us his books to publish and so on. But I greatly respected and honored him, and I was very privileged to publish him. I think he was a deserving Nobel candidate. He was greatly honored in this country, but that prize eluded him. Bikram Seth belongs to my generation, the generation I think of as the golden generation of Indian writers, and they're all now in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, some of them. And they were the generation that came of age immediately after independence, which was, 75 years ago. So the oldest of that lot, I think Salman is probably, even though he's a Brit, we think of him as an Indian writer because some of his greatest works were set in this country. He was born in this country and so on. Salman is the oldest member of that cohort, and the youngest is probably somebody like Kiran Desai, who's in her 50s. Now Vikram I would probably characterize as among the most talented writers of his generation because of the equal facility he has with poetry, plays, novels, essays. He can translate with ease from Sanskrit, Chinese, which he knows, and so on. He's quite the Renaissance man when it comes to literature. And I was very keen to publish him because while I published in R.K. Narayan and others, Vikram was the hottest young writer of his generation, and Penguin was just starting out. I was in my 20s, and I had to have a writer of his stature on my list. So I went to see him and said, I would like to publish a book of yours. So he said, why should I publish with you? I mean, who are you? I mean, I've published with, renowned publishers. You guys are just starting out in this country. So I said, well, I think we can publish you. The color of our money might be the same as that of other publishers, but I think we can publish you with greater passion and dedication and all of that. The kind of stuff that publishers say to writers. So he said, fine, I will think about it. So I made my offer to him in the form of a sonnet, because he was offering a book of poems, and he replied to me in sonnet form, and I've been his publisher ever since. So, Vikram and Narayan and others were very much part of our initial offering, and or at least in the first few years, and it's been a great privilege to publish them.
Okay. So that was for the Golden Breeze.
Yes, that was after the Golden Gate. Yeah.
Okay, but how did a suitable boy come about?
A Suitable Boy obviously is one of the most famous novels written by an Indian writer. It is, I think, still the longest novel in the English language. And at that point, I'd been publishing Vikram for a while, and he said, well, I have a new book. And I said, oh, can I see it? And he never shows you a word of what he has sort of written until he has finished it.
Okay.
That's unlike a lot of writers. Because publishers often want to see what they're going to be publishing. So if you wrote a novel or a book and I wanted to publish it, it's not likely that I'm going to give you a contract until I've seen what you've written. Okay. With Vikram, he would not show it to me. So I said, look, I mean, it's a bit difficult for me to give you a contract. So he said, okay, come to my house. So so I went to his house, and he opened the door to a room, and it was filled with cartons full of manuscripts. And he said, that's my novel. I said, really? And he said, yes. And so I hadn't, obviously I wasn't allowed to read a word, but I knew that this book existed, and it was just not a figment of his imagination. And I then made him an offer. And the thing about Vikram is, unlike some writers who, in order to get published or in order to find a readership, will try and, plug into trends and current fashions and so on, he often writes against the grain. At that point, it would have seemed foolhardy for any writer to write a novel which is very long when publishers were asking for shorter novels because of supposedly dwindling attention spans and the cost of production of a very large book and so on. So he writes a gigantic novel set in a time which is not contemporary. It was written after the fashion of the great Victorian novelists, but readers lapped it up. And I made an offer. It was one of the most ambitious books I've ever published. So, yeah, that was the story of A Suitable Boy.
Okay. I remember going to Chennai office of the American consulate for my American visa, because I was going to Harvard to study. And the lady there, because from the Justice Department, and one American will have to interview you. He said, you are in the IAS? Have you read A Suitable Boy? There is a character there. He is good for nothing. But he finally made it to IAS. So that was good.
Well, yeah, it has a great many sort of, aspects of India that he writes about, yeah.
So, well, I'd like to come back to you a little bit. Your House of Blue Mangoes was a success. It was received well, translated into 12 languages or something, and had a fairly decent commercial success too. But why did you write more? Oh, I know you have written two more books. Why didn't you? This is something which surprises many readers, because the guy who writes so well, why he doesn't write more often?
Well, it's quite simple actually. I mean, I wrote The House of Blue Mangoes because it's a book that I wanted to write, and I was very gratified by its success. I was quite nervous about it because, being a publisher, I knew what the odds were against books succeeding. There are many, many reasons why books fail, and most of them are not in the control of the writer or the publisher. But nevertheless, it's a book I wanted to write, so I wrote it. And I would have certainly liked to have written more, but the reason I find it difficult to write is because, quite apart from running publishing companies, I'm also a hands-on editor. And when you work with the work of other writers, you can't impose your writing on them. You need to write from within their writing. The best editors, I think, are not trying to sort of, refashion narratives of other writers in their own image, but they work from within to try and make that writing better. And when that's what I do for most of the day, it leaves me quite exhausted mentally and creatively. So I just find that it's difficult to write. I found it easier to write when I was, running companies where you dealt with operational issues as opposed to creative issues. But for the past decade and a half, perhaps longer, I've actually sort of worked with writers, so it doesn't give me much time to do my own writing.
Okay. So you can't have everything. Yeah, so I read somewhere that you have been leading Aleph for the last 10 years, or maybe more, a little more. Okay, and somewhere you said that Shashi Tharoor, his writing was the biggest commercial success. Can you give a line or two about in what parameter it was successful and why it was?
Well, it's one of those conundrums for which I honestly don't have an answer as to what makes a book successful. Very good books fail or are modest successes, and not very good books succeed up to a point. The only thing that never succeeds is a bad book, because the reader is not a fool, I think people make the mistake. For example, I most appreciate what I write is literary fiction, but that doesn't mean I can say somebody who writes commercial fiction is a bad writer. They're very good at what they do, which is commercial writing. Often people tend to be snobbish about one or the other genre, but I think that's a mistake. I think, though, what will always succeed is a really, really good book. Shashi Tharoor, who is one of our most recognized writers, is also a politician, has also tasted success in other fields. But one of the joys of publishing in a country like India is, while lots and lots of books are published, which, and quite a lot of them are not very good, but because our publishing industry is fairly new, especially in the English language, not in other languages which have a kind of lineage which is kind of longer, or a track record which extends further back into history. English is fairly new, so there are lots and lots of gaps that can be plugged. Now, this book that I was talking about, it's called An Era of Darkness, and it's about the British Empire in India. Now, there have been rather dishonest writers like Neil Ferguson, who has tried to sort of portray the British
as a benign
as a benign civilization, as something that was good for India, whereas in fact it is utterly rapacious, and we've taken a long time to recover from the 300 odd years that the British were in India. Anyway, so there hadn't been a good book about the Indian perspective on the British Empire, which was not just a rant, but which was actually grounded in facts and history and all of that. And Shashi happened to be a member of a debate at the Oxford Union, where he spoke against the motion, I think, which said, Britain was good for India or something. And that video of his speech went viral. And so I said to him, look, why don't you write a book that will take that further? Which is what he did. And then it became very successful. Right. The point being, I think if you publish books that are good books in areas that have not been adequately written about, they will succeed. And that's I think the job of publishers, especially with non-fiction. You can't do that with fiction. Where non-fiction is concerned, you direct writers towards things that they might write about, that they're qualified to write about.
Okay. Everything said and done, the trade publishing, apart from the school books or the college books publication, which accounts for probably 75%, and fiction and non-fiction account for about 4%. And that is of the order of 3,000 crore. And for a $5 trillion economy, it's very small really. Okay. 3,000 crore is not that large an amount, and that probably will be inclusive of figures of the regional languages and everything put together. So, how do you visualize? Of course, people say that 3,000 crore is large, but in the scheme of things, 4% and 3,000 crore out of a $5 trillion economy doesn't appear to be large. So I think we have got much distance to traverse, and in that background we also see some of the publishing houses folding up. Okay, so it doesn't appear to be very, very rosy picture ahead. And what's your take on that?
Well, the thing is, I honestly think that the situation is not as good as it could be, but it's also not as bad as you'd imagine. I think publishers need to be smart about what they do. If you're bad at business, you don't deserve to continue, I don't think. I think what this country lacks is what certain other countries have, which is enlightened governments which will support writers, not so much publishers, writers, to make them, to let them earn a living, and thereby perpetuate the best aspects of their culture. Here we don't seem to care much about culture besides pageant and glitz and that kind of thing. We need to support our writers, our creative artists of every stripe. Publishers, at the end of the day, have to be good at business. Okay. If I don't know how to run a publishing company, then I'd much rather, I shouldn't be allowed to be a drain on whatever resources that, I remember that there was, in Australia or some country, there was an agitation on the part of publishers to, I might be mistaken, but it was certainly a country that said publishers need to be given grants, publishers need to be kept alive. I'm not so sure that that's the business of government. I think government needs to support artists, universities need to support artists, and that we don't do enough of in this country. Besides that, I think we're fine.
Okay.
We might be small, yes, we're only 4% of the publishing output of this gigantic country and populace. But, what can you do about that? There's not a whole lot you can do about that. Within that 4%, try to do the best you can.
Of course, recently there's a rise of good quality non-fiction, okay, and people trained in the zero-sum game where we believe that if something rises, something will have to come down, okay, which is not necessarily true, but that is our Indian mindset works like that. So obviously, the audience here will be interested in the good non-fiction rising. What does it foretell about the fiction writing? In the sense, will it affect it, or will they autonomous of each other, or will they get influenced by it?
I'm not so sure that this zero-sum game concept quite applies here, because it harks back to your earlier question about the size of the Indian market. I think non-fiction and fiction, while there will be overlap between readers who read both fiction and non-fiction, there is a certain kind of reader who would be interested in nonfiction. Before this session, we were talking about a book that I'm publishing next month that I'm exceptionally proud of because it has never been attempted before. And that is a book that covers Indian history. We're a very, very old country. We're a very complex country. You know, recorded history is say, 2,000 plus years. The actual populating of the Indian subcontinent happened 65,000 years ago when out of Africa migrants came to Asia and then went to Europe and so on. And the geological origins of this country is 4.5 billion. This country is 4.5 billion years old, parts of it. Until the publication of this book, if I say a Martian arrived in Bhubaneswar tomorrow and said, I want one book that can tell me about India, I wouldn't know what book that would be. I could suggest 3 or 4 books. And this is not for any lack of people attempting it. But in the last 40 or 50 years, there have been only about 4 or 5 attempts that have actually been of any worth. You know, where, so what you really need is a historian, ideally, or an enthusiastic amateur, who has such a breadth of knowledge about this country's antiquity and modernity, and is therefore able to leave out and put in the right kind of information in an accessible enough way, which is a humongously difficult task. So anyway, this book is called New History of India, very prosaic, but it is a book that I think will long outlive me and will be read 3 generations from now because it is fantastic, and that book will be read by, hopefully, students, people who've never read a book or who have no desire to read a book in their lives. So I think that is what the rise of good nonfiction does. It expands the readership, you know. I mean, so that's what New History of India will do. Tomorrow there's a book on science, a book on, I don't know, you know, the different kinds of mango, Indian dogs. You know, there's just a whole bunch of things that if you found the right writer and you had enough imagination as a publisher, that you could do.
I agree. I recall reading a book like that in Jerusalem, and also Babylonian civilization, sweeping 700 years. Basically, you want a sweeping scope, and which also requires very high level of scholarship and rigor required in putting out a book like that. It is challenging, it is interesting, surely. The reference is to the new book by Rudranshu Mukherjee.
Yes, he's a very highly rated historian and the chancellor of one of our top universities. In fact, one of the sponsors of this festival.
So, David, you have set a very high standard with regard to editing, designing, contract management, production and marketing. What will be your advice to the local publishers, like local publishers, regional publishers? Obviously, they'll have to stand on their own, but they'll have to break even, they'll have to still prosper. What will be your advice?
I'm not much good at giving advice because, you know, I mean, I think the one thing that will not let people down is an emphasis on quality. Obviously, I mean, I was very impressed by Mr. Das's sort of publishing. The quality of the publishing is great, and the fact that he's a successful publisher means that he's doing some things right. I think the danger that publishers face is that you know, it's very easy to be a publisher. All you need is a little money and a manuscript, and you go to a printing press and you're a publisher, right? It doesn't mean that you're a good publisher, it doesn't mean you're a successful publisher, but you're a publisher. The bar is very low to become a publisher. To raise the bar a little, I think an emphasis on quality, an emphasis on editing, an emphasis on quality materials, very basic, prosaic things, binding, cover design, etc. I think if you do that, the odds are you'll succeed.
Okay. Now I'll put a slightly difficult question. Why books flounder?
Well, you know, as I think I said at the beginning of this session, I think there is way too many books being published. There are way too many books being published. A very great percentage of them should ideally have never been published at all, you know. And by this I don't mean books with a limited readership. You know, there are books of scholarship, poetry. There are many kinds of books that don't succeed on a popular scale but are very good books. But I think often books flounder because they're not very good. And then there are many reasons for good books not selling to expectation, because marketing budgets are not sort of large, there aren't enough bookshops, and so on and so forth. So I think there are many obstacles to success. And I think the biggest one is, you know, we need to be able to get a good book to the attention of readers, because if we don't do that, then the book is not going to work anyway. And I think that's where publishers fail. I think that's where the ecosystem is not equipped to sort of, you know, make sure that every good book gets its due. And so publishers need to be ingenious, they need to be aggressive, they need to sort of get books out before readers. And at the end of the day, you need to be able to make a book attractive enough, in every sense of the word, for the reader to be able to be tempted to buy it.
What do you see as the trends and challenges now in your industry, and what kind of impact it will have in future?
Well, the positive trends are we're having a great many good non-fiction books being written. There's a lot more attention being paid to translation, which I think is very important, and good translations, rather than just literal translations which nobody will read. So those are the two big positives I take away from the writing and publishing industry today. The bad things are things that we've always been sort of grumbling about: not enough bookstores, not enough marketing money, not enough readers, etc. And those things are not going to go away.
Okay, they'll subsist, they'll continue. Okay. What do you think about this quick transfer of the books by PDF, which became a style during the COVID time, you know? Everyone had access to download the PDF books and that kind of.
Well, you know, the interesting thing about that is when e-books became a reality, the physical book, people said, was going to be written off. And the really interesting thing about that is now e-books have plateaued.
Okay.
Including in countries where they had the deepest penetration, like the US and Korea. Now physical books outsell e-books once again. So what people forget about the physical book is as an invention, when it was invented in Germany, I think.
Gutenberg, I think.
Yes. The look of words on the page, even the best e-reader cannot replicate.
Okay.
And while the last two generations are digital natives, which is that they read more on screen than physical books, it is a fact that physical books still outsell e-books everywhere in the world. And that trend is not going away. So I think PDFs, e-books, etc., they are just another way of reading books. So I'm not particularly bothered about it.
But it could be slightly different in a price-sensitive market like India.
Unless you're stealing, which is basically unauthorized copying.
Yeah.
Most e-books are priced roughly the same as physical books.
No, this is the Kindle version. Yeah, maybe. I'm talking about free books landing up in your WhatsApp and...
Well, free books, that is definitely a trend today where you can self-publish, you can put things on platforms, etc. But believe me, most of them are not read. I can't vouch for this figure, but it's definitely much, much smaller than you would imagine. Occasionally when a book takes off, a self-published book takes off, very quickly that author is snapped up by a mainstream publisher. But they're still in a minority.
Something, people creep so much about the publication of English books and to the detriment of the regional language books not getting the required eyeball or the required attention. So that is there really a conflict between publication of English books and publication of books in the regional languages, or they are mutually exclusive universes?
Well, very few. I mean, Indians as a race are bilingual, trilingual, which is more than can be said about most countries. But when you have 18 or 19 languages, you can't read in all the languages. It is a fact that English language publishing is the biggest chunk of the publishing industry, and it's disproportionate given the number of people who actually use English, which is less than 15%, I think, in this country. What can you do about it? It's an aspirational language. People want to learn English. I don't worry too much about it. If you're a good publisher in Hindi or Bengali or Odia or whatever, you do what you have to do.
Okay. So maybe fundamentally the readership is the issue.
Of course. What most people forget is writers and publishers are not those who influence the publishing and book environment. It's mainly retailers and readers. If you don't have readers and if you don't have powerful retailers, it doesn't matter how many publishers there are, how many writers there are, your books are not going to be read. So that is going to be the issue. I think the question to ask is, how many bookstores are there in Bhubaneswar? How many readers are there in Bhubaneswar?
Okay.
And that will in turn drive publishing and writing.
You have pulled out 2 volumes of short stories, and you talk to any agent, he will tell you the short story doesn't have any future. And the latest being A Case of Indian Marble. And what is behind this leap of faith in such stories? Is it coming back because this generation has got attention deficit disorder? Is it staging it? Is this kind of fiction will be in vogue in future because it is crisp?
It's something I've never understood. I've never understood why short stories don't work as well as novels. I still don't understand it. But it is a fact that short stories sell less well than novels, unless you are one of the greats like, say, Alice Munro or George Saunders or V.S. Pritchett or Raymond Carver or, others of that ilk, Chekhov, obviously. I published this book because I have a personal interest in short stories, and it seemed to me something that hadn't been done yet, which was figure out the best writers of short fiction belonging to 2 cohorts, to Generation Z, which is the youngest, and the millennial generation, who were born in the 1996, 97 kind of time. Because this is also a successor volume to a book I published 5 or 6 years ago, which worked quite nicely, which was putting together the best Indian short fiction from as many languages as I could find. So to be honest, it's something that is a personal interest. It's not necessarily something I decided I'd do because I felt that short fiction is
staging a comeback.
I don't think it's. I have no real knowledge as to whether it's staging a comeback or not. I don't think it is particularly. But it's one of those things that I find a complete mystery. I don't know why. But I think it's a mistake to think that just because people have short attention spans, they're reading short stories over novels. I think people who have short attention spans are not reading at all.
Okay.
You know, I remember talking to a friend of mine who teaches in one of the universities, and he teaches creative writing. So apparently his students came to him and he had assigned a novel to them to read, and they said, look, would you mind assigning us another novel because the novel that you've assigned is too long? You know, so if people in the creative writing program are not reading novels, then I don't know who is. So I think it's that is something that we have to contend with. On the other hand, it's encouraging that reading has gone up, if rather marginally. So the reading habit is not going to go away. Books are not going to go away. It's a difficult time, yes, but we will survive.
Okay. So surely it is not Test cricket versus T20. So both will have to
coexist.
Have to coexist and find out their own furrows.
Yeah.
And this is the book, Indian Marvel, the case of Indian Marvel. That is what we are talking about. I like most of the stories. Mm-hmm. Okay, and I'll rather hold that if someone wants to be a short story writer, by reading all 40 of them, he will get a fair amount of handle on how to practice the craft. Okay,
yes,
because that is diversity.
Yes,
there is realistic short stories, there is allegorical short stories, there is short stories which go a notch or two above, which are very good. And it has got 5 or 6 stories translated from regional languages. Okay, so there is a very nice volume, etc. But I have my liking. Of some of them I like more than the others, but I respect all of them. Do you have what stories among them you personally liked? Because this I'm interested in knowing, because you are a writer yourself. It is not a judgment on the others, but what really touched you?
Well, I think I'm very, very partial to stories that are political in nature. And I don't just mean the business of politics, but it could be the politics of gender, the politics of fashion, the politics of food, whatever. Without being overtly didactic, in which case they don't work as fiction, I think I'm interested in politics with an underlying message, where the message is not kind of laid on with a heavy hand, but the fiction is beguiling enough or crafty enough or nuanced enough to impart a message that is very strong. Because I think in many ways that's what fiction does that non-fiction can never do. It can go deep into a variety of subjects, and the best fiction writers, that's what they do, which is why you still read Chekhov, for example. I mean, he had insights into the human condition, or rather he dealt with insights into the human condition in ways that every time there's a new translation, you get stuff out of it. You know, so the best stories are, in my view, stories which do that.
Okay, so that means the 26th Jan, okay, and greetings from the violent homeland, and maybe one is writing also.
Yes, very much so. And you know, for example, a story like The Current Climate, they're very, very good stories which deal with our current reality in very sophisticated and very nuanced ways that you know, make them linger in the mind of the reader long after they've been read.
Okay. But this is a very nice volume.
Thank you.
And being a short story writer, I feel good that someone is taking the lead in publishing them. 5 stories are translated from regional languages. That is not the universe. There are other stories, other languages which could have been translated. Do you think this number could have gone up?
Yes, very much so. And that is a complete, that's something that I felt really concerned about. But I think the problem is, you know, even though I said earlier that we're doing more in terms of translation, there's not enough, obviously. And I think it's difficult for a younger writer, because this focuses on writers under the age of 40, to necessarily come to the attention both within the language in which he or she is writing, but also to people who might want to translate them, because they're going to try and go after the established writers, the canon, and so on. So it was very difficult to find adequate translations of writers, of younger writers in the various Indian languages, and that is definitely something that I wish I had more of.
I'll be interested in knowing what went in your mind when you selected. That is obviously a method. There is no doubt about it. Okay. What is that method, and what is the criteria that you applied?
I think as an editor, who hopefully is not aligned to any particular agenda, political point of view, I think you have to use your own very subjective ideas of excellence. Like you said, there's some stories you prefer to other stories. And obviously there are some stories I'm partial to, but I think what I was most interested in, and I had a whole bunch of people working with me, editorial colleagues, advisors, scouts, etc., who gave me a long list of stories to pick from. I think I wanted to be as representative as possible of the various kinds of writing that were out there, literary writing, not commercial writing or genre writing. But at the end of the day, this is a very subjective take on what is the best writing to be found in these among these generations. Another writer might well have chosen differently.
Okay, that's the hazard of selecting, and I liked some of them, like something like "Swimmer Among Stars" by Kanik Tharoor, "Girl Who Hunted Death" by Nikita Deshpande, "My Time in Boyanica," partly because of same lineage.
Right, right.
Okay, and One Is this thing. I like them.
Yes, they're all very good stories. Yeah.
Very touching stories were "Power to Forgive," written by a Naga writer. Okay, some.
Avinu Kire.
Kire. "Power to Forgive," 21st Tiffin Box, and "The Crossing" is about the migrant going from one place to the other.
Yes.
And Radha Krishna is a very poignant tale of how human concern can really ignite a person, and without that human touch, without that concern, how the person melts like a flower.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Very strong stories, all of them.
Very strong stories. And some stories are political, obviously, and handled with aplomb. I have already told them, and you have agreed with me.
Yeah.
Okay. What do you see the future of fiction or short fiction for the next 25 years?
I honestly don't know. I don't think one has a crystal ball. I think there will always be good writers. There will always be brave writers. There will always be sensitive writers. And our country has so much that is wrong with it, and a lot that is right with it. But I think you will find that some of the strongest writing emerges in the most terrible times. It may not be immediate. It might have to be recollected in tranquility, maybe 20 years after it's happened. But I think we have the writers, and we have the environment that is going to sort of continue to give these writers enough material to keep them going for much longer than 25 years.
Okay, that is very modest, David, because for a country known for everyone wishing to give a horoscopic prediction of every event, you refuse to do that. Very, very authentic, but any advice to the young writers or the Indian publishers, rookie publishers, or the regional language publishers? That will come very handy, including Dhauli.
Well, the only advice I give myself is to be a good writer or editor or publisher, you need to read till your eyes sort of pop out. You know, you can't be, I mean, nobody can read everything, but you can read and read and read for a long time before you even venture to write a word or publish a word. I think that is essential for you to develop the kind of taste and apparatus which will enable you to be better at your craft, and that is the only piece of advice I think that is valid.
You must have been trained in rapid reading. Otherwise, every 4 days, if you have at least cursorily looked at any volume, you must have read it very rapidly, taken business decision, which is very critical. So, otherwise it's not possible.
Yeah, I read quite quickly, yes.
Right. And thank you, David. It was a pleasure having you. And I'm sure the audience here enjoyed our conversation. And you heard from the horse's mouth about publishing, about the state of fiction, short fiction, everything. We couldn't have tried for asked for anything better. And thank you for spending time with us. And we enjoyed it. And as the co-discussant, I enjoyed it the most.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very
That's
much.
really very kind. I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And have a good time here. Thank you.